But I have the full transcript. Now I'll write the new story with completely new characters, new setting, and applying all the formulas analyzed. I had just packed my overnight bag when my son called me a freeloader. Standing in the middle of the lake house I'd spent 11 years building with my bare hands, in front of people who believed every word he'd ever told them. He was holding my anniversary bourbon. He was smiling, and for a moment the only sound I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. But here's the thing about a man who builds things from nothing. He always keeps his paperwork. Stay with me until the end. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about love, about letting go, and about what it really means to be a father. I turned 63 last March, and I'll tell you something nobody tells you about that age. The silences get louder. My wife Evelyn passed 4 years ago from a blood clot that gave us no warning, no goodbyes, just an ordinary Tuesday morning that became the last one. Since then, I've learned to live inside the quiet. I run my small property management firm out of a home office in Columbus, Ohio. And most days, that's enough. The work keeps my hands busy even when my mind won't settle. But twice a year, I drive 3 hours south to the lake house on Harlan Cove to remind myself why I kept going when keeping going felt like the hardest thing in the world. Evelyn picked that land. She found it on a Saturday drive we took the summer after we got married. This long, empty stretch of shoreline with a weathered dock and pine trees that went right down to the water's edge. We bought it with money we didn't really have, borrowed against the future we were so sure we'd build together. We spent 6 summers putting up that house ourselves. Weekends, holidays, 2 full weeks every August. When the last beam went in, Evelyn cried standing in the empty kitchen, just looking out at the water. I never asked her why. I already knew. After she was gone, I drove down there alone for the first time and sat on the dock for 4 hours without saying a word. It was the only place I felt close to her anymore. My son Desmond is 34 years old. He's always been the kind of man who fills a room. Loud laugh, easy charm, the sort of energy that makes strangers feel like old friends inside of 10 minutes. I used to love that about him. I used to think it meant he'd be fine, that he had something in him that would carry him through anything. What I didn't understand until much too late was that there's a difference between charm and substance. And Desmond had never been forced to develop one, because I'd always been there to smooth things over before the difference became visible. His marriage to Sonia began 3 years ago, and I wanted to like her. I tried, but something about the way she looked at me in those early months, like she was calculating what I was worth, before she'd decided whether to be kind, put a small cold stone in my chest that never quite dissolved. Her parents, her father Hector and her mother Loretta, were warm enough on the surface. Hector ran a dry cleaning business out of San Antonio. Loretta taught 2nd grade. They loved their daughter ferociously, and I respected that. What I did not respect, though I was too slow to name it, was the way Desmond changed around them, softer, more performative. Like a man playing a version of himself that required the real version to stay quiet in a back room somewhere. I hadn't spoken to my son in 14 months when I turned down that familiar gravel road toward Harlan Cove. The last conversation we'd had, if you could call it that, ended with him telling me I was suffocating him. I'd called to ask if he wanted to come down to the lake house for Evelyn's death anniversary. He said I needed to stop making my grief his problem. Then he hung up. I didn't call back. After you've been hung up on a certain number of times, even a patient man stops dialing. It was a Friday evening in late October. I'd taken the week off for the first time in 2 years, the kind of week where you don't check email, don't answer clients, don't be useful to anyone. I had a thermos of coffee, a novel I'd been meaning to read since spring, and 4 days ahead of me with nothing in them but silence and water. The moment my headlights swept across the driveway, I knew something was wrong. 3 vehicles sat where there should have been none. 2 I didn't recognize. A newer black SUV with Texas plates and a silver crossover. And then one I did recognize immediately, because I'd made half the payments on it myself before Desmond convinced me it was a loan. His dark green Tacoma. Light poured from every window of the house. I could see movement through the glass, figures moving, the flicker of a television. Someone had strung lights on the porch railing, the kind of string lights Evelyn used to love, and the sight of them made something turn over hard in my stomach. I sat in my truck for a long moment with the engine idling. There was only one person alive who knew the entry code to that house. Only one person I'd ever trusted with it. I got out. The night air smelled like the lake and wood smoke, and the particular earthy cold of October in that part of the state. Someone had a fire going inside. I could smell it from the driveway. My dock shoes on that gravel path were quiet enough that no one heard me coming. The front door was unlocked. Inside, 6 people I had never met were arranged across my living room like they'd been there for years. Evelyn's quilt, the one her mother had made her, the one that had never left the back of the couch since the week she died, had been moved aside to make room for a pile of someone's jackets. I stood in my own doorway and took it in. Hector sat in my armchair near the fire. Loretta was at the kitchen table, with a woman I'd later learned was Sonia's younger sister, Ada, both of them working through what looked like a bottle of red wine. Ada's husband was on his phone near the window. A teenage boy, someone's kid, was stretched across the couch watching something on his tablet with headphones in, and Desmond was at my kitchen counter, pouring from a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle that I had been keeping in the cabinet above the refrigerator since the week Evelyn and I bought it on our last trip to Louisville together. We'd been saving it for something. We'd never decided what. He had his back to me. I said his name. He turned around, and I watched my son's face move through 4 emotions in about 2 seconds. Shock, recognition, calculation, and then the one that took my breath away, contempt. He set the glass down slowly. Then he straightened up and said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear, "Who that the freeloader in?" The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something has happened that everyone knows is serious, but nobody wants to be the first to respond to. Hector looked up from the armchair. Loretta set her wine glass down. The teenage boy pulled out one earbud. Sonia appeared from the hallway, drying her hands on the dish towel, and when she saw me, her face did something complicated that I didn't have time to read. Desmond. I kept my voice level. It cost me something to do it. What is going on here? I could ask you the same thing. He crossed his arms. I don't know how you found this place, but you need to leave. Found this place. That's right. I looked at my son, who had slept in the loft bedroom upstairs every summer until he left for college, whose handprints were still faintly visible on the concrete pour we'd done on the back patio when he was 9 years old. And I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder and more clarifying than anger. This is my house, I said. Hector stood up from the armchair. He was a broad man, unhurried in his movements, the kind of man who carried authority without having to announce it. He looked at me carefully. Desmond, he said. Who is this man? Nobody. Desmond didn't hesitate. Some guy my dad used to know. Probably tracked me down through old records or something. I told him before that this property came to me through inheritance, and I'd appreciate him respecting that. I heard Loretta draw a breath. Ada, from the kitchen table, said quietly, Desmond, he has a key. He broke in. The door was unlocked. Doesn't matter. Sonia had gone very still against the hallway wall. She was watching Desmond the way you watch something you're not sure is safe. Hector took a step toward me. Sir, I apologize for any confusion. My son-in-law told us this property belonged to his family for many years. If there's been some kind of misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I said. I'm his father. My name is Roland Cruz. I built this house. The entry code is the month and year my wife was born. The sound that came from Desmond was almost a laugh. That's insane. You've never been to this house in your life. The dock railing on the left side runs a little low, I said calmly, because Desmond was 7 years old when we set those posts, and he held the level crooked, and I let him do it anyway because he was so proud of himself. Silence. The pantry door sticks in the fall because the frame swells with the humidity off the lake, and I've been meaning to plane it down for 15 years. More silence. Evelyn's initials are carved in the bottom of the windowsill above the kitchen sink. She did it the first morning we woke up here after we finished the bedroom. I was still asleep. She never told me until our 10th anniversary, and I cried. Loretta stood up from the kitchen table. Desmond, Hector said, and his voice had changed into something much quieter and much more serious. Is this man your father? Desmond's jaw worked. He walked out on me when I was a kid. That's a lie, I said, without heat, just flatly the way you state a fact. He's mentally Desmond. Hector's voice cut through the room like a door closing. Stop. Sonia was the one who called the police. She did it without announcing it, just stepped to the far side of the kitchen and made the call in a low voice, and I was grateful for it because it meant this would be settled with documentation instead of voices. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. A woman named Deputy Schaefer, who looked about 40, and her partner, a younger man who said almost nothing and took notes on a small pad. Deputy Schaefer took in the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who had walked into the middle of family disasters before. Who placed the call? Sonia raised her hand. I did. There's a dispute over property ownership, and I need it settled officially. Deputy Schaefer looked at Desmond, then at me. Is there documentation on the premises? In my truck, I said. I came straight from Columbus. I had a meeting with my property attorney 2 days ago about updating the estate documents, and I still have the folder in my bag. Desmond said something under his breath that I chose not to hear. I walked back out to my truck in the October dark, my footsteps slow and deliberate on the gravel path, past the dock where the moonlight made a flat silver road across the water. Evelyn, I thought somewhat uselessly. I'm handling it. I came back with the accordion folder I'd been carrying since Wednesday. Property deed, original title, tax records going back 17 years, the building permits from each phase of construction, my homeowner's insurance policy, a photograph from the day we laid the foundation. Evelyn in a hard hat she'd bought as a joke, grinning at the camera, her hair blowing, the lake behind her, everything still ahead of us. Deputy Schaefer spread the documents across the kitchen table and went through them with a small flashlight, methodically, unhurried. The room was so quiet I could hear the fire. Mr. Pert Cruz, she said finally. This property deed names you as sole owner, recorded with the county in 2007, with an addendum filed in 2020 following the passing of your co-owner, Evelyn Marie Cruz. She looked up at Desmond. Son, can you show me any documentation supporting your claim of ownership? Desmond said nothing. Any inheritance records? Any deed transfer? Anything in writing? The silence stretched until it had a texture. I'll take that as a no, Deputy Schaefer said, not unkindly. She looked at me. Mr. Mester, Cruz, this is your property. What would you like to do? Every person in that room was looking at me. Hector had his hands in his pockets. Loretta was holding the back of a kitchen chair. Ada's husband had put his phone away. Sonia stood with her arms crossed, her face unreadable. The teenage boy had given up any pretense of ignoring the situation and was watching everything with wide eyes. And Desmond stood near the fireplace. My fireplace, the one I mortared myself stone by stone over a long, wet weekend while Evelyn read to me out loud from a book about the history of the Blue Ridge. And for one unguarded moment, I saw in his face the 9-year-old who'd held the level crooked on the dock railing, saw the boy who'd made me a Father's Day card out of construction paper every year until he was 13 and decided it wasn't cool anymore. Saw everything I'd been making excuses for since he was old enough to need excuses made. I'd told myself I was protecting him. I'd told myself it was what Evelyn would have wanted. I told myself that family meant unlimited patience, unlimited second chances, unlimited grace. But Evelyn hadn't asked me to dissolve myself in the service of keeping Desmond comfortable. She'd asked me to love him. Those aren't the same thing. It had taken me until this exact moment to understand the difference. I pulled my phone from my jacket pocket. Before I answer that, I said, I want to show everyone in this room what the last 6 years have cost. I opened the banking app. My hands were steady. Desmond's lease on the apartment he shares with Sonia in San Antonio. I pay $1,700 monthly. Sonia, I imagine you thought that came from his salary. She inhaled slowly. His truck payment, $460 monthly. His credit card, the one he told his father-in-law he uses only for business expenses. Current balance $11,200. I make the minimum payment every month. Hector looked at Loretta. A single look that carried something enormous. This house, I continued, has never cost Desmond a single dollar in property tax, insurance, or maintenance. I've paid it all. $14,000 a year conservatively. Dad. Desmond's voice had lost every ounce of its earlier certainty. I'm not finished, I scrolled through 6 years of transfers. Not including this property, I've given my son approximately $61,000 over 6 years. Some of it I was told was a loan. None of it was repaid. Most of it I was told was an emergency. All of it went to sustaining a lifestyle he told the people around him he built himself. Ada made a sound. It wasn't quite a word. Hector, I said, Desmond asked you recently to invest in a business venture. Hector's face went very still. How much did he ask for? A beat of silence. Then, quietly, $20,000. Did you give it to him? Not yet. I nodded once. Then you still have it. I looked at Deputy Schaefer, then back at the room. I want everyone to leave my property tonight. All of you. I'm asking you to take your things and go. I looked at my son last. Desmond, I want you to go too. And I want you to understand that when you pull out of this driveway, the things I showed you on this phone will be canceled before you reach the highway. The next hour happened the way hard things happen, slowly, with the particular kind of silence that falls when people are absorbing something they can't take back. Hector and Loretta moved with quiet dignity, gathering their bags from the guest room without speaking to Desmond directly. I watched Hector pause in the hallway, look at his son-in-law for a long moment, and then move past him without a word. That silence, I thought, was a mercy and a punishment at once. Ada's husband ushered the teenage boy out quickly, murmuring something low. Ada stopped beside me at the door. For what it's worth, she said, I'm sorry. You didn't do anything, I told her. I know. I'm still sorry. Sonia packed a bag in the bedroom while Desmond stood in the kitchen doorway watching me. I didn't make it easy for him, and I didn't make it hard. I just sat at my own kitchen table and waited. When she came out with her bag, she walked past Desmond without touching him. At the door, she turned around. My parents worked for 20 years to save that $20,000, she said. My mother tutored kids on weekends. My father drove 40 minutes each way to work every day for 22 years without complaining once. She looked at Desmond. I believed everything you told me. She walked out. Desmond turned to me. His voice, when it came, was stripped of everything. No charm, no performance, nothing left but something raw and exhausted underneath. Dad, please. You called me a freeloader, I said, in the house I built for your mother, on a Friday night, in front of strangers, holding our bourbon. He opened his mouth. I raised one hand. Go. He texted me 17 times in the following 10 days. I read every one of them. The first few were indignant. He'd find a lawyer. I couldn't do this. He'd contest the property on grounds of familial rights. By day 4, the indignation was gone, and something more genuine had taken its place. By day 7, he was sleeping in his truck. By day 9, Sonia had filed the paperwork. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't feel anything. I felt everything, all at once, all the time, in waves I had to learn to ride. But I had spent 6 years responding. 6 years fixing, buffering, absorbing the consequences of choices I hadn't made, and all it had produced was a man who could call me a freeloader in my own kitchen and feel justified doing it. I stayed at the lake house for the full week I'd planned. I read the novel. I sat on the dock in the mornings and watched the light come up over the water. I planed down the pantry door on Wednesday afternoon, just to do it, just because it had needed doing for 15 years, and the time was finally right. I cooked real meals. I slept without checking my phone. On the last morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and looked at the initials Evelyn had carved in the windowsill. EC small and lopsided, cut with a house key on a quiet morning when she thought I was asleep. I traced them with one finger. I know, I told her. I know it wasn't supposed to go like this. But I also knew, and I knew she would have understood this, even if it hurt her, that love given without limit isn't love. It's fear dressed up as devotion. And I had been afraid for years of what Desmond would become without me catching him. What I hadn't understood was that he became this, in part because I kept catching him. 7 months later, Desmond called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was quiet. Careful. Like a man moving across ice and checking each step. He was working at a logistics company in Columbus now. Dispatcher position. Nothing glamorous, but steady. He was renting a room from a college friend. He was paying his own phone bill for the first time in his adult life. He said it like he was confessing something embarrassing. I understood that. He said he'd been talking to someone, a therapist, about the patterns he'd developed, about what it meant to perform a life instead of actually building one, about what he'd done to Sonia and her family, and what he'd done to me. He didn't ask for anything. That was new. I know I can't undo it, he said. I'm not calling because I expect anything. He paused. I kept thinking about what you said that night. About how every time you covered for me, you were taking something from me. I didn't understand it then. I think I'm starting to. I looked out the window of my Columbus home office, at the maple tree Evelyn planted the year we moved in, at the long, ordinary afternoon light of a May evening. That's something, I said. Is it enough? I don't know yet, I told him honestly. I don't know if we get back to where we were. I don't know if that place still exists. Silence. But I'll tell you what I told your mother on the day we finished the dock at Harlan Cove, I said. I told her that some things you build slowly, that the ones worth having don't go up in a week. You take your time, you make sure the foundation is right, and then you see what holds. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, Okay, I said. We hung up. I didn't call back, but I didn't delete the number either. I sat there a while in the quiet of my office, listening to the ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening. A lawnmower somewhere down the block, a screen door, a dog. The sounds of a life that was mine, that I had built, that no one had ever given me. The hardest thing I ever did for my son was stop trying to save him. The kindest thing I ever did for myself was trust that the right choice and the painful choice could be the same thing. Evelyn knew that. She always knew it before I did. I'm learning. I've thought about that October night more times than I can count. Not with bitterness. That passed somewhere around the second or third week of silence after I sent them all out into the dark. What I think about is how ordinary it all looked from the outside. A house lit up on a Friday evening, string lights, on the porch, the smell of a fire. And somewhere underneath all of that, 6 years of choices I had made. Quiet, well-intentioned, loving choices that had built the exact situation I was standing in. That's the part nobody talks about when they tell stories like this one. We focus on the betrayal, on the moment the mask slips, on the look on someone's face when the truth finally lands. But what I keep returning to is what I built long before that night. Every time I covered Desmond's rent without asking questions, every time I absorbed the consequence of a decision he should have sat inside long enough to learn from, every time I told myself that protecting him was the same as loving him, I was patient and I was consistent and I was wrong. And the result was a man who could call me a freeloader in my own kitchen and genuinely feel that the word fit. There's a particular kind of pain in understanding your own role in something like that. It doesn't excuse what Desmond did. Calling me what he called me, lying to Hector and Loretta, nearly taking $20,000 from people who tutored kids on weekends and drove 40 minutes each way to work without complaint. None of that sits easier because I understand how we got there. But the understanding matters, because without it, I would have walked back into the same dynamic as soon as things got difficult enough for him. I would have answered the texts. I would have told myself it was different this time. What I learned, what Desmond and Sonia and that whole gutted evening finally made visible to me, is that character is not given. It is not inherited, and it is not protected into existence. It is built through difficulty, through facing what you did and sitting with the weight of it long enough that something real changes underneath. I couldn't build that for my son. I could only stop preventing it. The dock railing at Harlan Cove still runs a little low on the left side. I've never fixed it. I don't plan to. It's the truest thing in that whole house. Evidence of a 9-year-old boy holding a level crooked because he was proud, and I loved him enough to let the imperfection stand. That boy is still somewhere inside the man Desmond became. I believe that, but I also know now that believing in someone and subsidizing their avoidance of growth are two entirely different acts, and I spent a long time confusing one for the other. When he called from that unknown number 7 months later, quieter, steadier, paying his own bills for the first time in his adult life, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt something more like grief and hope arriving at the same time. which is an uncomfortable combination, but an honest one. We have a long way to go if we go anywhere at all. The foundation, if there is one, will have to be built the slow way, stone by stone, the way anything worth keeping actually gets made. That's what I know now. That love without limits isn't strength. It's fear with a kind face on. And the most courageous thing I ever did for my son had nothing to do with giving. It had everything to do with finally, after 63 years of living, learning when to stop.